The book, though, Christine Brennan, USA Today columnist, a long teased, long awaited, unauthorized biography of the biggest sensation in basketball on her game, Caitlin Clark and the revolution in women's sports. Unlike every other sports podcast and news show this week, Ben, we don't have an interview with Christine Brennan, but we're going to just talk about her instead. Did we talk about the Dejanay Carrington, Caitlin Clark dust up in the WNBA playoffs last year, where I think the Brennan hot button was pressed for the first time? Did we discuss that? I can't remember.
I don't recall discussing it. I feel like that's one I would have remembered. I don't remember having any lengthy conversations about this.
Yeah, me neither. So we've definitely covered it at Awful Announcing extensively. I think Christine Brennan has kind of become a recognizable name for WNBA fans for sure, and maybe even casual sports fans once again. Of course, she's had an extensive and historic career, but she has been reporting this book in addition to covering Caitlin extensively for the USA Today. And that altercation, dust up, whatever you want to call it, was in October of last year, where Caitlin's Fever were taking on the Connecticut Sun in the first round. And one of many of these little stories that has come up all the way through into this season, where Dejanay Carrington, kind of the enforcer, the defensive stopper of Connecticut, swatted a Caitlin shot and kind of ended up following through, smacking her in the face a little bit, and then cameras caught the Sun bench laughing, right? And we are going to get to now, but this is, I think, the kind of patient zero incident that leads us to where we are with this book coming out. And Brennan is covering that series and asks Carrington about the incident and the kind of social media response to it, the idea that the team was laughing, the idea that the hit was intentional. And Dejanay gives sort of a non-answer. I'm not talking about Caitlin, I think was what she said then. And then Brennan gets rung through the coals on, in women's sports media. Sarah Spain grills her about this on her iHeartMedia podcast. And basically, Brennan becomes persona non grata, I think, for a lot of mainstream WNBA fans who think of themselves apart from the new cavalcade of people that Caitlin has brought into the league, right? So that kind of sets the parties. Like, you're either Brennan, it gets sorted into pro Caitlin crazy. If you're not part of identifying that way, then you are against Christine Brennan. And the coverage and the grouping and the perspectives have kind of carried on into today, where this book has come out, and Brennan has, for sure, I think, joined the chorus of voices who are criticizing the WNBA incredibly harshly for not being ready for Caitlin, not supporting Caitlin, not backing up Caitlin in all these different ways. And that appears to be the crux of this book, that is a biography of Caitlin Clark, but really it seems to be an analysis of her arrival to women's sports and what it all means, the same conversations that a lot of people have been having. So we've covered a few of the excerpts, the interviews, and everything else. What have you made of her commentary in anticipation of this book, which comes out on Wednesday? Did I get everything? Was that too much, too little? Help me fill in the gaps here.
Well, I think at the core of it is that it is a very layered story, just in terms of Christine Brennan and her connection to Caitlin Clark through all of this. And I think if you take everything going on with Dejanay Carrington in and of itself, I have a hard time faulting Christine Brennan. Now, granted, a lot of this storytelling has come from her perspective, and so obviously it is going to be a little friendlier to her than maybe a more neutral party. But it does seem like she was reporting on this incident that was getting mainstream coverage and reporting it in a way that you would expect somebody to cover it. And because there is sensitivity regarding Caitlin Clark within the WNBA, because they aren't typically used to, or before last season weren't used to this sort of mainstream coverage. I think it's totally understandable why there did wind up being some backlash to Christine Brennan. But I also think that all of that ignores the greater context, which is Christine Brennan has been viewed fairly or unfairly as an advocate for Caitlin Clark and as somebody who is I wouldn't say a voice for Caitlin Clark, but somebody who is definitely pro Caitlin Clark. And you get into just looking through our archive, like we have a story where she's speculating about the idea of Caitlin using all her sponsors to just create her own professional basketball league, like just total fan fiction. You look and eventually, I guess what it comes down to for me is like, yeah, I think the Dejanay Carrington stuff, I think that's totally or largely defensible from Christine Brennan's perspective. But I also think that when you become a part of the story as a journalist this many times and as frequently as Christine Brennan has, then I do think there's something there. And that is something worth examining from Christine Brennan's perspective.
Agreed. So to me, here's where I come down on. I think an example where she maybe first made herself the story was around the Olympics last year, which was one of the, I guess, hotter debates that actually mattered around Caitlin through the past couple of years since she became a pro, where there was this idea that even if reasonable minds could agree that when you see a Diana Taurasi or even a Jewel Lloyd, players like that in an Olympic roster not even getting minutes, that even if Caitlin would have been relegated to not getting minutes and not actually playing, she should have been awarded a spot on that Olympic roster because of the marketing opportunities, the attention opportunities that would have come from it. And Brendon made that a whole political position. I mean, not literally, but like a platform to run.
It was a rallying cry. Yeah.
Yeah. And she, since then, it has come out that she kind of got into a stalemate, like a real personal disagreement with the Olympic coach over all of that, as she tried to poke around on what was going on. That's Cheryl Reeve, who coaches the Minnesota Lynx in the WNBA. And that is an instance where I guess the ends I don't understand and don't seem to justify like the means of how she went about covering that story, right? It's like, what exactly did you want? What is the end game? What's the goal here? And it did appear to be kind of just personal, like her opinion, her view of how the league and the women's basketball industry should be run, just sort of becoming the central force of why she was talking and writing about things the way that she was. And I guess as a columnist, there's more leeway on it than a traditional, straightforward, WNBA national reporter for somewhere like ESPN. But it did feel odd at times. And so then that I do think that bled into the instance like the Dejanay Carrington story, where when you make it clear where you stand, I think it's understandable for a player. We saw other Sun players around Carrington give Brendon the cold shoulder, and that became news. Like, all these things kind of domino their way down from you make it clear. Be the same as if, Skip Bayless tried to go, hey, I'm just doing a book on the Eagles, no big deal. It's like, well, you cover the Cowboys, you know what I mean? Or something, you're known for being one and the same with the Cowboys. I'm sure there's a better example than that, but it felt that way. And so you kind of come into now, Ben, where I look at it and I think a lot of the excerpts, a lot of the interviews that she's been giving feel very similar to the Olympic thing last year, where it's sort of, what exactly are you wanting from this? What, other than, it kind of feels like trolling the league, you know what I mean? And trolling the people around it, where we wrote about today, I think on Tuesday, that she said, Kathy Engelbert, the commissioner of the WNBA, she pointed out a pattern where Engelbert often either doesn't directly name Caitlin Clark in conversations about growth and financials, or when she does, she will often list other players as well, almost as a forced, instinct. I don't think that's incorrect. You or I could watch a series of interviews with Kathy Engelbert and name the same pattern, but I don't feel a lot of productive chatter here. I don't feel a lot of like, solutions journalism, to use like a, J school term or whatever. Like I don't know what the point is. And I feel like if I was a person in the league, if I was a player, if I was a coach, I would feel like, okay, so are you just simply pointing out that we didn't have the resources and the money and the staffing and the awareness and history to react to this properly? Because you might not be wrong, but it's kind of like, fuck you then. You know what I mean? Like, okay, You're right. So what, lady? You know what I mean? And I kind of think that's where we're at.
Well, and that's right. That's largely her thesis, is basically that this big media storm with Caitlin Clark was coming and the league wasn't prepared for it. And it's also like totally understandable the league wasn't prepared for it, because like this Caitlin Clark thing happened like in the span of a year. Like it really felt like from her junior season March Madness run to, I mean, I know she had a following before that, but in terms of being like a mainstream sports story, it felt like it was the second half of her junior season through the rest of her college career. And then she enters the WNBA. That's like not a lot of time to get, like, for a league that doesn't have a lot of infrastructure for that sort of mainstream attention. Like it's understandable that they would be caught off guard. And I also think like the tricky part with everything involving Caitlin Clark is you have the race dynamic. You have just the dynamic of this player is infinitely more famous than our second most famous player. And like, but this isn't an issue that is unique to the WNBA. Like I've seen this covering college sports. It's like, how do you treat the star freshman coming in? Like, how does Ohio State prop up Jeremiah Smith when they have all these seniors who felt like they've earned their spot? And then you just get to a point where it's like, yeah, Jeremiah Smith's the best player in the country. But it's like, there is this kind of awkward song and dance you have to do with it. And when I see Kathy Engelbert like kind of dance around the Caitlin Clark phenomenon, like I think we're getting a little bit closer to everybody just calling it for what it is, which is a phenomenon. But I guess I understand, like it would be awkward if she was just coming out and like putting the entire weight of the league on this second year player's shoulders. Like I think that would be something we'd be writing about and we'd be covering too.
Agreed. And I like the sensitivities to the over coverage, the perception that Caitlin's over covered, over focused on, the sensitivities from existing media, existing players, existing coaches. Like it is we could do a whole podcast just about that. I think, I think that it's understandable, and the trend lines were pointing up in much smaller ways prior to her arrival. Like I think you would say that around the women's bubble, the WNBA bubble in 2020, the political side of what they did there with the Atlanta or the Georgia Senate race and all those things got attention. And that maybe was where the uptick, you could say, started or whatever, but it's clearly exploded since then. And so how do you properly contextualize that? And I would say most reasonable minds would agree the explosion since then is almost entirely a result of her. Like the numbers are up in games she doesn't play, but mostly on a path that would have kind of just continued in a normal linear fashion dating back to 2020 when the bubble happened, but not exponential, not explosive, not something that could explain a 6x TV rights, multiplier. And so I guess like there is a fine line that you sort of have to walk, but again, like I'm not sure what use. I don't think Christine Brennan is walking that line in a productive way when you say Kathy Engelbert should just say Caitlin Clark's name more. Mm-hmm. That's the answer here? That's the solution? Like, we haven't read the book. Like, we should say that. Maybe it's more productive in the book, but the part of it that I think might ultimately be productive that I guess I could speak a little bit on is the media side of it, the part of it that you and I actually cover and care about, and that this podcast, theoretically is about, where there is, I think you would have to say, the rules around media in the WNBA are more protective and more restrictive than other leagues. And that does appear to be backwards from what you would want at a point when the league feels like it's about to really take off and be profitable and be, the hot thing. It doesn't feel like those guardrails make sense when you think of it that way.
Let me ask you this, because you do cover the WNBA. Like, how much media coverage are they getting on a nightly basis? Because there's a part of me that just wonders, like, if this is a matter of like Christine Brennan is just being singled out because she's one of the few national columnists or reporters or whatever that feels really devoted to this as their full-time job now. Like, how does the media coverage to the WNBA compare to the NBA on a nightly basis?
I think there's to answer the part you just said before I answer the real question. I think like it is true, right? Like I think Brennan is kind of being clustered in with the argument that like the Cowherds, the Shannon Sharps, the Stephen A. Smiths kind of ran away with when she first entered the league of everyone's jealous. This league doesn't know what's good for them. Whatever. Whereas if Christine Brennan was the only one making it, it wouldn't be, I think, so heated. But it does pale in comparison, and I think that's the weird part of where the league is at right now. Is it is part of the national conversation where you and I are talking about it, and those debate show hosts that I just mentioned are talking about it consistently, especially Caitlin. But the day-to-day on-the-ground coverage of the league is still not really built up to drive that conversation in a productive way. And I do think that is part of why the conversations just go in circles and are effectively useless around her right now and around the league right now, because all that there is to talk about is the fight that goes viral or like parsing the reading of the lips and the reading of the, facial gestures from her and Angel Reese when they play each other, or overlooking into a hard foul, because there isn't enough of the day-to-day coverage. I think the Fever are one team where there's more of it because they have a beat writer who has, been able to travel more often, and they have some independent people that do good work and everything. But like covering the Mercury here in Phoenix, who are, I think most people would agree, one of the legacy franchises of the league. They've always had a good attendance. They've always played in an NBA arena out here. They've won 3 finals. They've made 4. Taurasi is a face of the WNBA, and she played here for most of the history of the sport, of the league. It's very little. Like, we have one newspaper reporter. We recently started getting one TV reporter because the team is on local TV now, so that news station comes and covers the team, but they weren't before, and that's it. Like, there were many games where I would be there and there was less than 5 people total in the media section covering these games, and that hiring spree, that like buildup just hasn't happened in the same way that it has for the NBA, where I'm in overflow seating as a regular media member covering Suns games, and I've done that for 8 years and have a pretty significant like little niche covering the Suns. So I think that bleeds into where they have to accept lesser media, independent media, people who don't have experience. Those people ask stupid questions, insulting questions, bad questions, and then the players say, no, I'm not dealing with this. And then they retract, and their turtle shell comes out, and then you go and say, well, they're not ready for Caitlin, they're not getting covered enough, they're not ready for the limelight. Where in that circle does this stop, I think, is kind of the point where we're at now.
Yeah, it's funny because I covered a little bit of you did too, Sophie Cunningham repeatedly taking a shit on Cleveland and Detroit last week when they got announced for their expansion franchises, and just watching the clips from the press availabilities, it's still just like 1 or 2 people. And that's the Fever. That's Sophie Cunningham, who like might be one of the 5 most famous just mainstream WNBA players at this point in terms of her social media following. So I find that very fascinating. Real quick, going back to 2020, you mentioned the upward trajectory that women's basketball was on. I actually have a funny story about that, and maybe a hot take that I don't fully believe in, that I want to launch. But I remember like March 2020, Mina Kimes had an episode of, this was when she was doing ESPN Daily, and she had a whole episode on Sabrina Ionescu, who I believe was in her senior season at that point. And, getting ready for March Madness. This is women's basketball's biggest star. This is the next big thing in women's basketball. That episode of ESPN Daily got me so excited for Sabrina Ionescu. I went and checked out like her highlights. I was like looking at Oregon stuff on eBay, like all the stuff I do when I just become infatuated with an athlete.
Similar to your Maple Leaf shirt that you're actively wearing.
Exactly.
Right now.
This is for Austin Matthews. And then the next day COVID happens. And so it's just like, there's no NCAA tournament anymore. Like, we'll see you in 18 months, Sabrina. But my hot take that I've always wanted to launch was that me and my friend always had this joke that Justin Bieber stole Jesse McCartney's career. He was a young pop star. And my hot take was that Caitlin Clark stole Sabrina Ionescu's career. But I know that's not accurate because Sabrina's still awesome. But like, it feels like Sabrina could have gotten a lot of the buzz that Caitlin wound up getting had just like we not gone through an entire pandemic in 2020.
Had she had the tournament where they were the heavy favorites and won her title and had the highlight moments, and then gone into a regular WNBA season where she wasn't, on during the daytime with the bubble weirdness that we all saw. And then actually Sabrina got hurt that in the bubble and only played like 4 games. But
that's right.
Yeah, it's a good take. I think I've been interested why the Paige Becker's story hasn't really hit in the W. I mean, the wings are bad, and that's easy to point to. But, I think that it's a different can of worms. But you want to talk about not being ready. That Dallas organization is in even worse shape than the Fever were. And that's part of what they're up against too is, oh crap, you mean we're like a big time sport now? And I don't care about the jealousy. That part of it is played out to me, but it's a fact that the business and media side was not ready for this. I just wish, and I hope that Brendon's reporting will be more productive there, and that maybe the media side is the more fixable part. You can't just snap your fingers and build arenas or, hire staff. But what you can do is take lessons from every other major league in the world and say, what's actually the best way to get the coverage that we want and not have it be as ridiculous as it's been.